My fellow Bahamians, it has been more than 40 years since we achieved our independence and 50 years since the realization of majority rule. The journey itself has been long and arduous. We have celebrated many successes, but we have also suffered the consequences of many missteps as well. Tonight, however, I wish to challenge each and every single Bahamian watching to envision a greater Bahamas, a country where we as a people are living, breathing representation of the words penned by Timothy Gibson those many years ago. A people moving forward, upward, and together. The first and perhaps most critical step to addressing the country's economic and social issues must begin with a focus on our nation's youth and the system put in place to educate them. As we formulate the blueprint that will guide us into the next phase of our development, the quality of education which our young people receive will be a deciding factor in the quality of life that future generations of Bahamians will enjoy. If national success is the top of the totem pole of national development, then education is the very foundation. You know, a quote made famous by the late Nelson Mandela goes as follows: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." But you know, even more profound, however, is the remainder of that quote, which Mandela says, "When a man is denied the right to live the life he believes in, he has no other choice but to become an outlaw." You know, for far too long, Bahamians have been denied the quality of life which we deserve. As a result, we have watched countless of young men and women resort to lives as outlaws. You know, a report compiled by the Alliance for Excellence Education in 2013 found that even a 5% increase in the graduate rate, particularly in male students, could save a country millions of dollars in crime costs. You know, experts have long found a more educated populace to be a more disciplined and law-abiding populace as well. To the criminal element among us, do not be mistaken. You will be forced to face the long arm of the law under the next DNA government. Not only, though, that we will enforce the death penalty, but we will strengthen bail laws to ensure that those accused of serious crimes are not allowed back into society until they have had their day in court. It should be noted, though, that the DNA's zero-tolerance approach to crime will not only consider the punitive aspects of the fight against crime, but the rehabilitative and educational aspect as well. Where possible, we will work to rescue those young men and women who have been failed by the system of education that has failed to take into consideration the many ways which 21st century learners process information. Young men and women who have been locked out of doors which only a qualified education can open. You know, whether they choose to become employees or entrepreneurs or young people, they deserve better. Under a DNA government, Bahamians can anticipate the transformation of the University of the Bahamas and the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute on Andros and Grand Bahama, with student housing, job creation, and population migration within the first and second term. Through public and private partnerships, the DNA will invest in the development of flagship schools for film and creative arts and science and technology in Grand Bahama, marine and agriculture science in Andros, and schools of business, medicine, and government and political science in the capital. Not only does this train the workforce that can build this economy, but it also attracts foreign students who can also add millions of dollars to our economy. You know, in keeping with the DNA's mantra that our greatest resource is the Bahamian people, it is the DNA's goal for all Bahamians to have free education up to the University of the Bahamas. The linkages between education, unemployment, and a stronger economy cannot be ignored. The health of the Bahamian economy has been on a steady decline, a fact most recently categorized by the fourth downgrade of our country's sovereign credit rating by Standard & Poor's. You know, added to years of non-existent growth, high levels of public and private debt, high unemployment, and the near dissemination of the country's middle class, we have quickly become a society of the haves and have-nots. So how do we fix this? The first step is by addressing the country's astronomical debt. This will require new levels of fiscal responsibility and a reining in of all government spending. That said, the DNA will enact a Fiscal Accountability Act which forbids the government from borrowing more than 15% of the government's previous year's income. Secondly, the DNA will establish a national procurement agency that will be responsible for the purchase of every item by all government agencies. This, combined with a legislated code of conduct for parliamentarians which would prohibit them from participating in any government contract, would eradicate rampant corruption by prosecuting those found to have their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. For far too long, we have allowed a culture of corruption to permeate our system of governments. Too long. The DNA remains committed to rooting out corruption at its core, showing zero tolerance for bribery, zero tolerance for cronyism, and zero tolerance for nepotism at any level of government. You know, coupled with a responsive Freedom of Information Act, the DNA will create a whistleblower system in place that will allow persons to report any corrupt activities by public officials. Such reports will be investigated by an independent Office of an Ombudsman who will act on behalf of and in the best interests of the people. As a means of increasing economic activity, the DNA will liberalize exchange controls, lessening the chances of even further downgrades by the world's international rating agencies. Under a DNA government, Bahamians will finally be allowed to hold US dollar accounts, the contents of which can be used to invest globally, all while enjoying lower interest rates. And that's in vain. Direct foreign investors, hotels, and the banks will be encouraged to pay their employees and their local bills in US dollars, thereby increasing the central bank's US dollar reserves and the amount of US dollars in the pockets of all Bahamians. My fellow Bahamians, the DNA government remains committed to creating a kind of economic environment that will not only encourage employment opportunities, but entrepreneurial opportunities for creative and enterprising Bahamians. After ensuring access to a better system of education, the DNA will improve access to the necessary capital incentives and concessions which are so readily offered to foreign investors. You know, in addition to modernizing key elements of the public service, the DNA will move to improve the ease of doing business. We need it. We've got to bring more efficiencies to the registry department and the business license section of the Ministry of Finance. This will improve the speed of which companies can be incorporated, as well as the turnaround time for the issuance of new licenses. As an additional incentive, the DNA will implement a system where fees, listen to this, fees are set based on net income and not gross income. That cannot continue to happen. You know, as part of the country's continued economic renaissance, the DNA will oversee improved access to affordable land for all Bahamians. The DNA will end the practice of using Crown land to curry political favor and fatten those pockets of their families and friends. Under a DNA government, all of the Crown land will be removed from the office of the Prime Minister and placed in a National Land Bureau. It will be divided into residential, commercial, industrial, farmland, wetland, and where appropriate, reserves. In addition to abolishing that quieting Titles Act, the DNA will establish a proper land registry, which will be bolstered by a transparent system of allocation. We will regularize acres of generation property on the family islands, creating wealth for scores of family island residents. This will act as the crux of a wider plan for family island development, which will include substantive infrastructural development and job creation initiatives on the family islands, with the aim of encouraging and making it attractive for family island residents to remain on their respective islands, to assist with their islands' development, as well as facilitate migration out of New Providence. Across the country, residential parcels of Crown land will be available for sale through a revamped Bahamas Mortgage Corporation at interest rates low enough to give young families a head start. Commercial properties and farmland will be leased at market rates for those with viable business plans, and the sale of Crown land to foreigners will come to an end under the DNA. As your next government, the DNA will usher in a new era of Bahamian ownership, not just in terms of land ownership, but in all major sectors of our country's economy. As it stands today, 90% of the banking sector is foreign-owned. 90%. The same applies to all of the major hotels. Under a DNA government, the central bank will be encouraged to allow qualified Bahamians to have equity or ownership in both the retail and offshore banking sector. Similarly, Bahamian investors with the wherewithal to own a hotel, casino, or a cruise ship will be encouraged to do just that. Afforded all of the incentives, subsidies, tax breaks as all other direct foreign investors have had and continue to enjoy. The end results, ladies and gentlemen, will be discernible improvements in the standard of living for all Bahamians. This means more disposable income in each household, lower mortgages, and certainly lower energy bills. By converting from oil to natural gas in the generation of electricity, residential and commercial customers will considerably reduce the energy costs and improve energy efficiency and reliability. With our economy set right side up and Bahamians back to work, a DNA government will work to address issues facing the labor movement in this country. Bahamians can expect the DNA government to take a hands-on approach to our workers' welfare. The time has come for workers of this country to be seen as partners and not as adversaries. The DNA government will come to power looking to foster an environment where the individual and corporate productivity are equal with self-worth and where the love of work is esteemed as a national obligation. We will work to include union organizations in the training and/or orientation of public service employees, facilitate the delivery of training and upgrading for workers at the University of the Bahamas and BTVI, appoint promotion boards with union representation to consider promotion for workers in their bargaining units and invite leaders of unions to have observer status at the Commonwealth heads of government meetings and other international meetings where the decisions and outcomes impact workers' rights. We will also work to protect employment opportunities for Bahamians through improved processes within the Department of Immigration as well. A DNA government will implement an efficient immigration policy that will outline the process of short and long-term work permit applications, annual residency, spousal permits, permanent residency, and citizenship. A DNA government will ensure that the Department of Immigration is run efficiently and effectively. The DNA's plans for immigration include the adoption of a smart policy position which promotes effective border protection, detention, and retention. By investing in technology, we can effectively and efficiently police our porous borders. We can and will detain those who have broken the law and entered our country illegally. And we will retain those who have a right to be here and who have contributed to our society. This position, adopted by such first world countries such as Singapore, Canada, and Australia, has been responsible in part for their economic growth and productivity seen in those jurisdictions. Combined with the DNA's proposed focus on education, crime prevention, and economic revitalization, the Bahamas can also reap similar benefits. The final elements of the DNA's plan for national development include the larger task of overhauling the system of government, which no longer works. The DNA was the first to call for legislation limiting the powers of the Prime Minister and limiting each Prime Minister to 2 terms. The DNA was the first to suggest fixed dates for general elections and a long-term advocate for the introduction of local government in New Providence. In addition to these common sense improvements to our system of governance, the DNA will implement procedures to allow the recall for non-performing members of Parliament, as well as legislation to usher in campaign finance reform. My fellow Bahamians, I asked you earlier to envision a Bahamas like the one described in our national anthem. In 2017, let us move forward, upward, and together toward greener pastures as a people with a renewed sense of purpose and a country that our children are proud to inherit. Happy New Year, Bahamas.